School's culture of tolerance lets students like Nicholas Cruz slide. So this is out of the Orlando Sentinel or Orlando Centennial. And this actually just came in. It's also on Yahoo. So I'm reiterating that because it isn't fake news. So basically, what it is an article. Most of them, most of the things that I read are straight out of the news. So the article goes in to say that School, the Broward schools have grown so tolerant of misbehavior that students like Nicholas Cruz are able to slide by for years without strict punishment for conduct that could be criminal. The culture of leniency allows children to engage in the endless loop of violations and second chances, creating a system where kids who commit the same offense for the 10th time may be treated like it's the first, according to the records and interviews with people familiar with the process. Cruz was suspended at least 67 days over less than a year and a half at West Glades Middle School, and his problems continued at Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School until he finally was forced to leave. The South Florida Sun Centennial obtained Cruz's disciplinary records, reviewed discipline policies, and found students can be considered first-time offenders even if they commit the same offenses year after year. The district claims of reforming bad behavior is exaggerated. Lenient discipline has an added PR benefit for the district. Lower suspensions and expulsions and arrests, along with rising graduation rates. The forgiving attitude goes beyond the school's controversial Promise program, the target of considerable public scrutiny for enabling students to avoid criminal charges for misbehavior or misdemeanor offenses. No one heeded warning signs about Nicholas Cruz before the school's shooting occurred. The program, the pride of Superintendent Robert Runcie, was designed to use counseling and mentoring to help students avoid the school to prison pipeline. Under former zero tolerance policies, Black students ended up suspended, expelled, and arrested at rates that were widely disproportionate to their peers. Desmond Blackburn, then Broward's chief school performance and accountability officer, specifically instructed teachers and staff in a video years ago to challenge and nurture students while using suspensions, expulsions, and arrest as absolute last resorts. Now, many teachers and parents say Broward has created a culture in which teachers are expressively told or subtly pressured not to send students to the administration for punishment, so a school's image is not tarnished. Mary Fitzgerald taught for 37 years in the district before retiring from Sunrise Middle School in Fort Lauderdale in 2016. She said she retired a year earlier due to her concerns about school student disciplines. So it was so many things. I had 3 students bring knives to my classroom. One was out of the classroom for one day, and another had many things on his record, and he was gone for 5 days, and none of them were expelled. Safety concerns at Sunrise were brought up at faculty meetings. The message out there is that students are untouchable. Habitual negative behavior means nothing anymore. State the minutes of a faculty council meeting on February 2nd, 2015. My principal basically would tell me it was his job to market the school. So he was adamant about not looking bad, Fitzgerald said. So Runcie, in an interview with the Sun Centennial, acknowledged there are complaints that discipline isn't consistently enforced. In a memo to the principals Wednesday, Runcie said he reinforced that, and we have to be vigilant in reporting every incident so that we can ensure our students who are victims as well as offenders get the appropriate intervention and support. We're going to try to make sure from the top we're sending the right message related to discipline and holding our schools accountable, he said. The superintendent said in a memo that he will propose the school board create a climate and discipline department to better monitor and support school teams as they address students with major challenges and concerns. School district shuts down information after Storm Douglas. So the Promise program, Pine Ridge Education Center, just outside Fort Lauderdale, houses the Promise program as well as secure classrooms for other children who have been expelled from their regular school but need supervision and guidance. The principal describes it as a school of promise and encouragement, not of a school of punishment. So students call it the ZAP school, as in you've been zapped and sent there as punishment. So suspensions by year in Broward County schools. For those who are interested in statistics, here are in suspension schools and out of suspension um, of schools. So these are the years at the bottom, and those are the totals of suspension in school, and then out of suspension where you're out of school. And so I don't know if you can see it very well. Runcie claims the Promise program has a 90% success rate at keeping children from reoffending, but the statistics can be deceiving. A student can commit a subsequent infraction without being considered a repeat offender as long as it is not the exact same violation in the exact same year. So the following year, they start with a clean slate. It's extremely problematic, Tim Sternberg, a former assistant principal at Pine Ridge Educational Center who administered the Promise program. You can develop a psyche that is okay to commit crimes because you can refresh the clock every year. So Sternberg says that he doesn't have confidence in the district's data. They aren't tracking kids over time. So these are the arrests per 1,000 students across Florida in 2016 and then 2017. And there's a rate. And so you see here. And so far what it looks like, they're looking more at the schools looking good and having a polished look rather than actually disciplining children. And that's why a lot of times things go uncovered or they're unhandled or the kids are not disciplined the correct way. So they figure if they get away with the one or two times, they'll just continue doing it. And then they learn, kids are smart enough to learn the system of how school disciplinary action is. And so if they figure you're not going to report it or you're not going to write them up or suspend them, they just keep doing it. It doesn't help to coddle kids and to pat them on the back or put them in corners because they know that you're going to continue allowing them to get away with things. And if they're never suspended or they're never the parent is never talked to about the kid's behavior, the kid continues to come to school and repeat the same thing over and over again. And that is not only happening in Florida, it is happening here in California at the schools, and it is happening at many schools, and they do the same thing. Trust me, they do the same thing. I have witnessed this, and I have said this in previous videos, and it's a huge problem. And I noticed that one form of punishment is good for one kid, but for other kids, there is no form of punishment whatsoever. And there is favoritisms where one group of kids, they coddle them, they talk to them, they don't do much paperwork. But if it's African American students, they discipline them to the full extent. So you heard what I read in the beginning of the article, that the Black students were getting disciplined, suspended, expulsions, and arrested. So this pretty much backs up what I've been saying. So the district's student code of conduct, first created in 2004 and '05, includes a complicated discipline matrix that lists and the prescribed punishment for a litany of offenses: skipping school, violating rules, being disruptive, having drugs, fighting, destroying property, committing a crime. It was also designed to help staff make fairer and more equitable decisions in handing out penalties. But potential punishment have become more lenient over the years. And more than 5 years ago, a high school student who used profanity towards a staff member would receive 3 to 10 day suspension. So that was reduced to 1 to 2 days after the discipline chart was revised. Well, and California, some of the schools I've been at, the kids are allowed because the teachers and staff out, and they don't discipline whatsoever. They just, maybe if they do anything, they'll say, "Oh, I don't like that. You shouldn't talk like that." Example, "Jimmy, that's inappropriate behavior," and then they move on. So this is what I've witnessed. The first violation for disruptive classroom behavior called for an in-school suspension of 1 to 5 days. Later, it was reduced to a suspension of under 1 day. So serious school incidences at Broward County schools, the total of incidents reported to law enforcement. And so the year is at the bottom and the number of incidences are on the side towards the left. So since 2012 and 2013 school year, suspensions have declined 27%, according to the Florida Department of Education. Incidences reported to law enforcement have fallen 8%. The number of arrests of 1,000 students is down to 64%. Per 1,000 students is down to 64%. So the district's menu of choices for dealing with rule-breaking students include detention, internal suspension, out-of-school suspension, expulsion, where children can be sent to an alternative education center. Or another option is the Promise Program. Under attack, Runcie is proud and protective of the program, which was launched under his leadership November 2013, when Broward Sheriff Office, the Public Defender Office, the NAACP, and the State's Department of the Juvenile Justice, the state attorney signed an agreement to reduce schools-based arrest, but the program is under attack because of widespread allegations that Cruz and Marjory Stoneman Douglas school shooter benefited from it. So Runcie had insisted that the Cruz was not in the Promise Program at all, but he did an abrupt shift this week and said that Cruz had been referred to it in 2013 for vandalizing a bathroom. So Cruz did not complete the 3-day stint. The district said, but the administrators haven't said why. A couple of months later, he was sent to a special school for children with severe emotional behavior disorders. As a tot, he was found to be developmentally delayed, and he had been considered a special needs child in school, so entitled to certain services, the protections under the law. So some parents and community leaders have criticized the superintendent for misleading the public schools about Cruz, and the school district appears not to be able to make sense of all of the records it has on him. Well, Sounds very familiar to me, and we have students that I have seen that have similar behavior patterns, such as this student that they're talking about. Yeah, the school shooter. And there's several of them where they don't discipline them. They allow them to get away with whatever they get away with, and they let them continue to go to the school. Some of them will scare the other kids. They'll threaten the teachers. They'll call the teachers out of their name. I won't even say some of the names that they call some of the staff members, adult staff members, and teachers, and they let them go. And these kids are not even middle school yet. So I'm just being honest that we will see this kind of stuff happen again and again and again, unfortunately, because the way they handle things at these schools, they're not telling the parents anything about the kids. They just skip them on, and skip them on. And if you try to say something as a staff member and you're the only one speaking out on behalf of what you see, then they all gang up on you. It's like a little cult there at some of these schools. Some things go on like that where people know each other, they know how to manipulate paperwork or get people fired. So that's why nobody says anything, and people who want to say stuff, they want to report it anonymously, but most of those things don't really get looked at, not fast enough. And that's why you have these situations right here where you have school shooters. So that's the honest truth. So to me, it reads an indication that the various discipline programs in the place at the district are confusing, poorly implemented. It's basically what I've been saying, and executed. And so this is in Florida, but it's not just happening in Florida. So it's happening in other school districts outside of the Florida region. So, and clearly, if we take the district at its statement, they've been difficult to track, said Ryan Petty, whose daughter, Alania or Alania, was one of the 17 people who was shot to death at Cruz's Valentine Day massacre. So, if the records are this difficult to find, clearly it would be difficult to know whether this is helping students or not. Exactly. So, despite Cruz's history of discipline problems or disciplinary issues, neither the school nor the police ever steered him to the justice system. So, the table below shows the history of incidences involving Nicholas Cruz, as reported by the school of officials during his time at West Glades Middle School and Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High. So, in between those schools, Cruz attended Cross Creek, a public school in Pompano Beach for students with emotional and behavioral disorders. So, here's the list of incidences, all the types of incidents. I'll just read the list of incidents. There's dates, there's the school name, and the consequence that he received. So, profanity and use of insulting, obscene language. 1 day. So, that was probably like a suspension, or, he had to stay home. Profanity and use of insulting, obscene language. 1 day. Profanity and use of insulting, obscene language. 2 days. Disobedience, insubordinate. 2 days. Profanity towards staff. 1 day. Fighting. 1 day. And individual counseling. So, profanity, use of insulting, obscene language. 1 day. So apparently he knows how many days he's going to get, and so he just keeps doing it over and over again. So, profanity and use of insulting language. 4 days. Okay. Profanity and use, it goes on, the list goes on and on and on. So, disruptive, unruly behavior. 5 days. So he had a history before all of this. He had a history. This one up here, fighting. 1 day. Individual counseling. And so that was just part of the list. Click on the next one. There is multiple. I'm clicking on the next one. There's another one. Okay, so level 3 bus violation, 5 days bus suspension. So he apparently rode a bus, and some of the kids, they get like, you know, to be picked up from their house and driven to school, and then they can be picked up by bus at the school and driven to their place where they live. And so this is the same thing. And so now I'm clicking on 4. So there's like 4 different page fulls of incidences. This one right here is in red. It says vandalism of $1,000, promises, referrals, AES 3 days. So it, all the people that were talking and saying they didn't know, they didn't know he was like this right here shows you they knew he was like this. And so this is the proof right here you're looking at. And look, that's just 4. There was also something saying next, 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 next. So who knows? There might have been more pages. They just gave, a number of, who knows? Who knows? That's just the Westglade School, too. And then this right here is Stoneman. Down at the bottom, profanity and use of insulting, obscene language, 2 days. Stoneman, fighting medium, 2 days. Stoneman Douglas, profanity, use of insulting, obscene language, 1 day. Stoneman Douglas, profanity directed towards a staff member, 2 days. Stoneman, assault, verbally threat, low level, non-criminal, 1 day. So that's the way the kids think about it. Oh, I'm only going to get 1 day. Oh, it's easy. I'll just go home and play my PSP or play my video games. I'll be back at school so I can cuss another teacher out. That's the way their minds think. So this is pretty much the whole article. It was in the Orlando Centennial, and it was put out today. So underneath, there's, I guess, a video. I'm not playing it. It says Nicholas Cruz, the Stoneman Douglas gunman, was suspended at least 67 days over less than a year and a half at Westglades Middle School. So that was the list. I'll pan back down to it before I end the video. And his problem continued at Marjory Stoneman Douglas High School until he finally was forced to leave. Many teachers and parents say that Broward has created a culture in which teachers are expressively told to subtly pressured not to send students to the administration or for punishment so a school's image is not tarnished. Well, guess what? That's not the only school that does that. And I'm being honest, that's not the only school that has done that. I've been to several different schools and I've seen some of this behavior that this kid has, and these things that I'm looking at is all very familiar. I've seen students behave this way, the same way, and not be punished. They're not even, it's worse than this. They at least give, which 1 day you see, 1 day he's 1 day. Try a school that doesn't suspend kids at all. They just coddle them and they just pat them on the back. They make the teacher coddle them and tell them, oh, you're going to be all right. It's going to be fine. Or you're just going to stay in the room and you wait. And then try having the parents also having a disability problem or having issues at home and not adhering to the warnings or not even caring even. Or you call the parent and you can't contact them because the number they gave you is not the correct number. So there's a number of incidences that I've seen. But this right here, he has a track record. I know some kids who do the same things that I'm looking at right here, disruptive on campus, assault, profanity directed towards us. Okay, I'll just list out some of the things that I have seen. Disruptive on campus, I've seen a lot of that. Profanity, a lot of times directed towards staff members. And you see a lot of that is here. Fighting, a lot of fighting. Profanity directed towards staff members. So he had also attempts where he was assaulting other children. I've seen kids where they've done things that is pretty much assaulting other kids and also assaulting staff members. I've seen this happen and nobody says anything, nobody does anything. And if you say something, they get mad at staff, certain staff members. If you're not if you're not like in a position where you can fight against the mentality of the bureaucracy that goes on in some of the school districts, then you're pretty much left on your own and they'll bring everybody against you and make it turn it around, flip it around and look like it is you that's the problem, not the kid. And then you wind up hearing about these stories years later. That same kid shot up a school or shot up some kids or did something to staff members. And this is where you get this from. Exactly. It's dead on. But anyway, this is really sad, you know, 67 days over less than half a year and a half at Westglade Middle School. So this is how many times that they suspended him. And a lot of the suspension days were like 1 day, 2 day, but it added up and he knew how to manipulate that whole thing. And I know some schools where they try not to suspend kids at all. They I feel like the same thing that they're doing that they've done at this school to try to make it look good, it's being done at other schools. And then the teachers don't have very much support, but then too, you have teachers who have their own issues. They select what students that they're going to discipline. And so I don't know if I said this in a previous video. There was one student that came from New York and he was African American and he had one real big, you know, flip out. And immediately they sent him to one of those schools that you send kids that have behavioral problems. And I thought it was weird because he never cussed any of the teachers out. He never spit on us. He never kicked us. He never did any things like that. But I've seen other kids who've done far worse than he did, and they never did any paperwork on them. And I'll mention one other incident. There was a kid that they kept doing that to. They kept coddling him and giving him chances and letting him pretty much do what he wanted to do. He would stand on tables. They'd have to chase him. He'd You're going to be taken back by this one. He would try to get in cars with strangers, and his parent was saying he was trying to do this and that she didn't know what to do, that he would also run into the middle of try to run into ongoing traffic. So she couldn't control him. And I could see the signs in this kid that he had some serious behavior issues. Yet the school did not do anything to do any paperwork for him until finally he got so bad when they moved him on that they were forced to put him in a school like that because no other teacher could handle him. That's how bad it was. They had to put him in a restrictive school setting. And he uses profanity, he fights, he cusses, he bites, he spits, he kicks, he threatens how he's going to stab other kids and staff. This is what, I was hearing and seeing. And I was wondering, they're doing this paperwork. Are they mentioning all of this? He threatened the bus drivers. And so they didn't do the paperwork on him that they did on the African American student who had never done all of that stuff. I had never seen the African American student do this, but this other kid, he was doing all of it. And this student was Mexican. He was a Mexican little boy, and he has other siblings, and so they always would go and talk to the parents and try to find out the background and they did a lot of coddling a lot of, like coddling instead of disciplining and falling falling through with, following through with the disciplinary action. You didn't see any of that until he finally got so unmanageable to deal with. They were forced to do it. But with the African American students, they don't wait for having to be forced. They do it even if it's not really needed. They don't give them, in other words, what I have seen, they have not given them they don't give them the coddling treatment or the second chances. And so immediately they go into the disciplinary mode and the paperwork, and they move them on. And so I just thought that that was not fair. I personally thought it wasn't fair, but I didn't have enough clout to just say, this and this is what I've seen, blah, blah, blah. Because I know what the school does is what this school is doing. They want to make their school look like they're the best school and there's no problems. But how does that affect the students if they have these issues? And so that's what I'm saying is that I think you're not really helping these kids by, being prejudiced or biased. You're actually making it worse for them. So you're going to have more Nicholas Cruzes that are going to come about because of all the coddling and letting these kids get away with basically murder. You're allowing them to and you're enabling them, allowing them to know that I can do whatever I want because I'm not black. I can get away with spitting on people, calling them out of their name, being disrespectful. I've even seen the kid, as the mother came to the school, violently kicking the mother in the stomach, violently. And nobody has wrote anything up on the kid until they finally were forced to do it. And I wanted to say something, but I said, if I say something, then they'll take it a whole nother way because of who I am. They'll think that I'm the one with the issue when it wasn't that kind of thing. I saw this kid needed help. And so I did mention, to therapists, I said, don't you see that he's really got some issues? Do you write that he has this and this and this? So I would always be vocal and say things, but my voice was not is not recognized. And a lot of it, I believe, has to do with the racism. And it's in the schools, and the bias and what they choose to do for one kid versus another kid. And so I just thought it was really unfair. And two, to have kids like this around the other kids who aren't behaving this way robs them of their education because those kids can't learn if you're always coddling the one that's disruptive and breaking everybody apart and tearing up everything and being violent. And so this is the kind of thing that happens not just in Florida, but it has happened in other school districts. And I'm wondering what the protocols would be for these other schools. What's happening at this school, should they take a look at other schools? Because it is happening at other schools. It's not just happening at Florida in the Florida area. So anybody thinks that it's just happening at this school, they're sadly mistaken. It isn't. So anyway, give your feedback or your comments on what you think about this, because I've seen this at other schools that aren't in Florida, that are right here in California. So anyway, I'm going to end this video. This was out of the Orlando Centennial. So like, comment, subscribe. Thanks for listening.